Hi there. Today I am recording what I will talk about in class, just so that you have another reference to go back and review before the final. So today we're going to talk about shoulder blade mobility and stability. So we call it, in Pilates, we're going to call it scapular stability and mobility. And the scapula is just the shoulder blade. So the shoulder itself is one of the most complex anatomically joints in the body, right? It's got all kinds of movement. And anything that is complicated in the body is more prone to injury. It's said that the shoulder is the most flexible joint in our body. As I just said, the more flexible or the more mobile a joint is, the more prone it is for injury. It's actually, the shoulder is the most commonly dislocated joint in the body. And so because of that, it's important to create stability, some strength around that shoulder blade. So how do we create some strength or stability? That is through the rotator cuff. So the rotator cuff is a group of muscles and tendons that literally create a cuff. So I'm going to see here if I can create an image for you. That create a cuff around the upper arm bone that holds that upper arm bone into the shoulder socket. So let's pretend like this is the head of my upper arm bone, the humerus. Right? So here it is. And then the cuff are these four muscles. And I'm going to simulate them with my fingers and my thumb, 3 fingers and a thumb. And that rotator cuff snags on, grips the upper arm bone and holds it into the shoulder socket. That socket up here is pretty shallow, right? A deeper socket would hold things in, but because it's shallow, that rotator cuff has to hold it in there. And if any one of these muscles or tendons or the way that they work with each other gets out of alignment just a little bit, one gets a little stronger or a little weaker, it sets us up for trouble. So those four muscles, the rotator cuff muscles, help navigate where that upper arm goes, right? And it keeps that bone, as I said, in that shallow socket. Any imbalance, as I alluded to a second ago, where something gets weak or something gets dominates or overpowers one of the other muscles, one of those muscles gets a little stronger because you've been working on it, and the other 3 don't get the same attention. Things get tight or weak, and compensation has to happen, and then we get a tear in the rotator cuff. So a lot of us will know somebody, especially grandma and grandpas, that have rotator cuff issues. There are a lot of people. And actually it's a part of aging. Anybody over 50 probably has had some kind of issue with their rotator cuff or shoulder at some point in their life. So this upper extremity, right, the arm is an upper extremity, the leg would be a lower extremity. This upper extremity, they say, has the ability to come to 1,600 different positions, right, in 3D. And when it works properly, the shoulder makes activities like throwing or hammering or shoveling or raking or painting or climbing up on something, lifting, swimming, even waving, right? Possible. A painful shoulder makes any of those activities extremely uncomfortable. Think about somebody that's having shoulder pain. It's almost impossible to bring your arm up to brush your teeth or to comb your hair. Dressing becomes an issue, right? Imagine trying to put on something that hooks in the back, right? Or a sports bra if you're a female, to get your arms up like this to pull that darn thing down, or a swimsuit top. Washing yourself, washing your hair, washing your back, or even sleeping becomes really uncomfortable. If you've ever known somebody with a rotator cuff injury, they almost never can sleep on their back. What ends up happening is they sleep in a recliner or in a position with the injured shoulder sort of propped up. Because as soon as that shoulder starts to open up, as you lay on your back, it becomes extremely painful. Rotator cuff injuries are the most common upper extremity problem that recreational and pro athletes have. So extremely common. So it's super mobile. More mobility means less stability, which means more injury. So it all makes very much sense. Plus we have 4 things that have to work together, right? And if there's any imbalance, trouble happens. So this won't be on the test, but just a little background information. There are 3 bones and 3 joints that make up that the shoulder. So in order to well, anyway, let me just the bones. So the clavicle, right? Your collarbone, the scapula, that bony little wing on the back side of your body. In class, I looked at it. Remember, a couple of times in class. And then the upper arm bone. So those are the 3 bones. And the 3 joints are that ball and socket joint here at the shoulder, at the top of the upper arm bone, right? So shallow socket here. And then the joint here at the very top of the shoulder, the AC joint. And that's at the top of the clavicle and the shoulder blade. And then there's a little joint right here where this hand is, right, the sternoclavicular. And this is what actually, this tiny little joint holds the arm to the torso, this tiny little joint. Most of us don't even think of it, but if I sort of roll my shoulder forward here and put my hand on that little joint, if you take that little notch, it's to one side of the joint, you can feel it actually moving. All right, so 3 bones, 3 joints. So in order to have efficient movement, right, to be able to get all of those positions of the arm, or shoulder, we need to strengthen the rotator cuff to get full range of motion of that shoulder blade. And I'm sort of exaggerating this, but I have my hand on my back and I'm just sort of feeling that shoulder blade glide across my rib cage. And when you do the workout that I posted, you'll see what I'm talking about. But I can feel my shoulder blade glide. So I need my shoulder blade to glide over the rib cage so it's nice and smooth. There's no herky-jerkiness happening here. And then I have to improve the stability of my shoulder blade for positions like plank, right? So that I don't want that shoulder blade to wing out like a bony chicken wing, right? I need it to be able glued up onto my shoulder blade. And for those of you who when I did your assessment and I talked about scapular winging, that can be an issue. All right, so here's what we're going to talk about next is some movement or ways to strengthen the rotator cuff, some exercise to strengthen it. When we're talking about strength, the rotator cuff likes lots of repetition but very little weight. So I would never use a 10-pound weight and do any of these exercises, right? It's probably 20 to 30 repetitions and really low resistance. And for us in Pilates, the resistance we would use is something like a TheraBand. Remember when I talked early on in Pilates that I said we would almost never do more than 10 repetitions of anything? This is one of the cases where that's not true. So rotator cuff likes lots of repetition. All right, so a couple of moves that I would do to strengthen my rotator cuff. I'm going to take my TheraBand and I'm just going to sort of secure it here on one hand with one hand against my knee. And then I'm going to take the TheraBand and I'm going to open it out. So my elbow stays glued into my rib cage and I open out. And my forearm, I'll turn sideways so you can see, my forearm stays parallel to the floor. My thumb always reaches up in the way that I'm doing it right now. There are a couple other variations, but for this one, our thumb is going to stay up. And I'm going to pull and rotate out, right? And I would repeat that on one side, and then I would go to the other side. I'll just turn and show you. Good. So that's one version. The other version, I'm going to loop my TheraBand over my doorknob here. Now we're going to reverse the other direction. So now ideally I would be upright, level with my doorknob, but for right now I cannot do that. So now this one, the first one I moved away from the body. Now this one I'm going to move toward the body. So again, my forearm stays parallel to the floor. I take that thumb up and I glide my hand toward my belly button. And again, this same idea goes here. I'm going to use lots of reps, but not much resistance. And then we'll just pretend on this other side that I'm holding on to my TheraBand and I'm closing things up. Now, obviously this isn't giving me any resistance because I don't have my TheraBand tied to anything. All right. Now, so that is the first movement we'll talk about. And the second thing we're going to talk about are telescope arms. Now, I'm going to simulate it here. In the video that I posted, you will see that we do it lying down on your side. And when we did our assessments in class, this is one of the things we did. So pretend I'm laying down the floor. I'm going to glide my hand forward. I'm laying on my side on the floor with my head resting on my forearm. I'm going to glide that shoulder blade across my rib cage, and then I'm going to glide it back. So I'm working on mobility. Good. And then of course we do the other side, right? So I'm laying on my side on the floor on the mat, and I'm gliding my shoulder blade over my rib cage as I glide my shoulder forward, my arm forward, and then pull it back. And we've done this in class together, but I want you to practice it. Maybe pause the video here. The next is snow angels, and we've done these in class too pretty much every time we do a roll down. But essentially it's this movement. Arms come overhead. I'll call it a jumping jack movement. Your thumb is leading the way, right? So it points up to the ceiling the whole time. It's a little easier on your shoulder with the thumb pointing up. That's why I always cue you that way. So, arms come up. Good. Alrighty, and then for stability, so those were all for mobility or strengthening. And now for stability, typically we would use a push-up or a plank position. You all know where you are as far as your planks. So hands underneath your shoulders. And in fact, I'll do it here, just facing this way. I'm going to plant my hands underneath my shoulders. I'm going to come to a plank version, and shoulders end up right over my wrist here. And that creates stability. Now, let me do it from the side, perhaps. I want you to think about if you're one of those people that has winging, right? If on your assessment you had winging, something like this will happen. I want you to activate and push up between your shoulder blades. Alrighty. So I think that is about it for shoulder mobility and stability, or scapular mobility and stability. We're heading on toward the end of the movement principles. So looking forward to seeing you on our Google Hangouts. Bye-bye.